There are moments when the day has not yet spoken, but your soul already feels heavy. Nothing has happened yet, but something is pressing on the inside. This is why the morning matters. Before voices rise, before demands begin, before expectations knock on your door, there is a window where the soul is still tender, still listening, still open. That moment is sacred. Psalm 120 does not begin with celebration. It begins with honesty. Our cry, our voice lifted, not from abundance, but from distress. And that is important because many people think prayer is only powerful when life is calm. But this psalm teaches us that some of the most effective prayers are born in tension. When the heart feels surrounded, when peace feels distant, when truth feels rare. I cried unto the Lord in my distress, and he heard me. That single line rearranges everything. It tells us that God is not moved by perfection. He is moved by authenticity. You don't need the right atmosphere. You need the right posture. Distress did not disqualify the prayer. It powered it. Some of you wake up already tired, not because you didn't sleep, but because you slept among battles, conversations that never happened, arguments you keep replaying, fears that feel louder in the silence of morning. And before you even step out of bed, your spirit is already at war. This is why Psalm 120 belongs to the morning, because it teaches you how to speak when your soul feels surrounded. The psalmist talks about lying lips and deceitful tongues. Not just people who lie, but environments that drain truth. Places where peace is scarce. Spaces where you must constantly defend your integrity just to survive. And the prayer is not change them. The prayer is deliver my soul. That is maturity. Because sometimes God does not remove you from the environment. He preserves you within it. He guards your soul while you walk through noise. He keeps your heart steady while everything around you is unstable. This is not a prayer for escape. It is a prayer for alignment. In the morning, you are not just asking God to bless your day. You are asking Him to keep your soul from contamination, to protect your inner world from external chaos, to silence voices that want to define you before God speaks. And then the psalmist says something very revealing. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. That line carries weight. It describes the pain of choosing peace in a hostile world, of waking up with a gentle heart in a sharp environment, of desiring rest while others thrive on conflict. And the psalm does not shame that posture. It honors it. Peace is not weakness. Peace is strength under control. Starting your day with this prayer is saying, I refuse to let the temperature of my environment become the temperature of my soul. It is declaring that your spirit will not mirror the chaos around you, that your words will not become weapons just because others are armed. This is why the morning prayer matters, because whatever you don't submit to God early, you will struggle with later. Whatever voice you allow first will shape everything that follows. When you pray Psalm 120 in the morning, you are doing more than reciting words. You are placing your soul under divine custody. You are saying, guard my mouth, guard my heart, guard my responses, guard my peace. And something shifts when the soul is guarded. You walk into conversations without losing yourself. You face pressure without becoming bitter. You hear lies without absorbing them, because your day did not start with reaction. It started with alignment. This is not a loud prayer. It is a weighty one. It settles you, grounds you, anchors you. And by the time the day begins to speak, your soul has already heard from heaven. That is how you start the day. Not rushed, not afraid, not defensive, but kept guarded, at peace. Morning is not just a time on the clock. It is a gate. It is the first doorway the soul walks through before life begins to demand explanations, reactions, and strength. What enters you at that gate often decides what follows you through the rest of the day. This is why the earliest moments after waking are so spiritually sensitive. Your mind is quieter, your defenses are lower, and your spirit is more receptive. Before opinions, before responsibilities, before memory starts shouting for attention, the heart is still listening. Whatever voice speaks first often sets the inner direction. Many people underestimate this window. They rush into activity, into noise, into consumption, without realizing they are allowing the world to speak before God does. And once the world speaks first, the soul begins to respond instead of led. Anxiety gains momentum, fear finds space, yesterday's weight quietly slips into today. The morning becomes reactive rather than intentional. But when the morning is treated as a gate, something changes. You begin to understand that access matters. Not every voice deserves first entry into your spirit. Spiritually, gates are places of authority. Whoever controls the gate influences what comes in and what goes out. In the morning, your soul is deciding what will have permission to shape your emotions, your thoughts, your reactions. If worry enters early, it multiplies. If peace enters early, it establishes order. If truth enters early, lies struggle to survive later. This is why prayer in the morning is not ritual, it is governance. It is taking responsibility for your inner world before external pressures attempt to rule it. Morning prayer is not about length or eloquence. It is about alignment. It is the act of saying, before I face people, systems, and uncertainties, I submit my soul to heaven. It slows the heart enough to remember who is in control. It reminds the spirit that the day is not random, even if it feels unpredictable. When you honor the morning gate, you are not trying to control outcomes. You are choosing who leads you through them. This is especially important because life does not usually break us with one overwhelming moment. It drains us through accumulation. Small frustrations, unspoken disappointments, constant demands. The morning gate is where accumulation can be interrupted, where yesterday's residue can be released instead of carried forward, where the soul can be reset before it starts collecting new weight. When the gate is guarded, the day may still be challenging, but it will not be chaotic inside. The storms may come, but they meet a soul that has already been anchored, already positioned, already listening to a higher voice than the noise waiting outside. Before the world begins to speak, your words carry unusual weight. There is a kind of authority that rests on the first things spoken in the quiet of the morning because they are not yet competing with noise. In that stillness, words are not reactions, they are seeds. They drop into the soul when it is most open, most impressionable, most undefended. This is why careless words in the morning can wound deeply, and intentional words can stabilize an entire day. When life becomes loud, words lose depth. They become tools for survival, not instruments of formation. But before the noise begins, speech is slower, purer, more deliberate. The heart has not yet been crowded by pressure, and the mind has not yet been pulled in multiple directions. Words spoken in this space do not fight for attention. They settle. They shape the inner atmosphere quietly, almost unnoticed, yet with lasting effect. Many people wake up and immediately consume words rather than speak them. Messages, headlines, notifications, memories, expectations, all entering before the soul has a chance to respond. When that happens, the inner world is formed by external voices. Fear can enter without resistance. Anxiety can define the tone. Discouragement can feel logical before truth is even considered. But when you speak first, especially words aligned with prayer, you reverse the order of influence. You are no longer being shaped, you are positioning yourself. Words spoken early do not need to be loud to be powerful. They carry. Psalm 120 is often read too quickly, as though it is simply a short song of ascent, but its depth is found in where it comes from. It is not a song written from rest, it is a cry formed under pressure. The speaker is not relaxed, not settled, not surrounded by comfort. The language itself reveals tension, strain, and emotional weight. This is important because it reframes how we understand spiritual strength. Strength in this context is not the absence of distress. It is the decision to cry out while still inside it. The opening words make this clear. The prayer does not begin with gratitude or praise, but with distress. This tells us that God does not require emotional polish before listening. The psalmist does not wait to feel better before praying. He prays because he does not feel better. That distinction matters. Many people believe they must first regain composure, clarity, or faith before they approach God. But Psalm 120 dismantles that idea completely. The cry itself becomes the evidence of faith. Pressure has a way of exposing what is truly happening inside the soul. In comfort, people can pretend. Under strain, truth surfaces. Psalm 120 is honest about the environment, honest about the pain of falsehood, and honest about the exhaustion of constant tension. It does not exaggerate the situation, but it does not minimize it either. This balance teaches us that spiritual maturity is not denial, it is clarity. Naming distress does not weaken prayer, it sharpens it. The psalm also shows that distress does not mean distance from God. The phrase, "and he heard me," carries quiet power. It confirms that heaven is attentive even when the prayer rises from confusion and pressure. God's hearing is not delayed until peace returns. He listens in the middle of unrest. This changes how morning prayer is understood. It means you do not need to wake up calm to pray effectively. You can wake up burdened and still be heard. Understanding Psalm 120 this way removes shame from struggle. It allows prayer to become a refuge rather than a performance. The psalmist does not pretend that everything is fine. He brings the truth of his condition into conversation with God. This is why the psalm works so well in the morning. Mornings often expose what the night could not heal. Thoughts linger, worries surface, and the soul feels the weight it carried to sleep. Psalm 120 gives language to that moment. It teaches that the correct response to pressure is not silence or suppression, but surrender through honest prayer. When distress is voiced rather than hidden, it loses its power to isolate, and the soul begins the day not pretending to be strong, but positioned to be sustained. One of the quiet pains revealed in Psalm 120 is the experience of living among voices that distort truth. This is not merely about lies spoken openly, but about environments where sincerity is rare and words are weaponized. The psalmist is not complaining about a single incident. He's describing a prolonged exposure to speech that erodes trust and peace over time. In truth is constantly bent. The soul grows weary, not because it cannot endure hardship, but because it is forced to remain guarded at all times. Living among distorted voices creates a subtle tension. You begin every conversation prepared for misunderstanding. You weigh every word, not to communicate clearly, but to protect yourself. Over time, this vigilance drains emotional and spiritual energy. The heart longs for rest, but the environment demands alertness. Psalm 120 captures this exhaustion without exaggeration. It acknowledges how deeply words can wound, especially when they come from people or systems you cannot easily escape. Distorted voices do more than misinform. They reshape reality. When lies are repeated often enough, they begin to sound normal. When manipulation becomes routine, clarity feels like rebellion. This is why the psalmist's prayer is not centered on correcting others, but on preserving his own soul. He understands that the greatest danger is not what is said around him, but what those words might begin to form within him if left unchecked. The morning becomes especially important for someone living in such an environment. When you wake up after being surrounded by falsehood, the residue lingers. Doubt creeps in quietly. Confidence erodes slowly. You begin to question your perceptions, your intentions, even your worth. Psalm 120 does not ignore this internal battle. It brings it into the open and places it before God. The prayer becomes a line of defense, a way of re-establishing truth before the day exposes the soul to more distortion. There is also a loneliness in living among voices that twist truth. Even when surrounded by people, the soul feels isolated because genuine connection depends on honesty. When honesty is absent, presence does not bring comfort. The psalmist's cry reflects this isolation. He is not asking for popularity or validation. He is asking for deliverance. Deliverance in this sense is the restoration of inner clarity and peace, not necessarily a change of location. Understanding this key point helps explain why Psalm 120 is so relevant for modern life. Many people live in constant exposure to misinformation, manipulation, and performative speech. The psalm teaches that the first battle is not external, but internal. Guarding the soul against distorted voices begins with recognizing their impact and refusing to let them define your inner narrative. Morning prayer becomes the moment where truth is reasserted, where the soul is reminded of what is real before stepping back into environments that profit from confusion. In doing so, the heart learns to remain anchored. Even when truth is rare and voices around it continue to bend reality, Psalm 120 reveals a profound order in how God works with people under pressure. The psalmist does not ask first for circumstances to change. He asks for his soul to be delivered. This order is intentional. It shows that before God addresses what surrounds you, he attends to what is within you. Many people want relief from environments, conflicts, or seasons, but God often begins by stabilizing the inner life. Not because the external situation is unimportant, but because the condition of the soul determines how any change will be handled. The soul is the place where thoughts settle, where emotions are processed, where identity is reinforced or eroded. If the soul is left unguarded, even favorable circumstances can become damaging. Success without inner stability produces pride. Rest without inner healing produces emptiness. This is why God's role as keeper of the soul comes before his role as change of situations. He understands that an unkept soul will misinterpret even good outcomes. In Psalm 120, the prayer, "Deliver my soul," is not dramatic language. It is a recognition of vulnerability. The psalmist understands that prolonged exposure to deceit and conflict threatens the integrity of his inner world. His greatest fear is not remaining in a difficult environment, but becoming distorted by it. This reveals spiritual wisdom. It shows a man who values alignment over comfort, preservation over escape. God keeping the soul means he becomes the filter through which everything else passes. Words spoken around you do not enter unexamined. Pressures you face do not define your identity. Emotions rise, but they are not allowed to rule. This keeping is quiet and often invisible, but its effects are profound. A kept soul can walk through chaos without absorbing it. A kept soul can engage conflict without becoming hostile. A kept soul can wait without becoming bitter. Morning prayer is where this keeping is consciously acknowledged and invited. It is the moment where the soul is placed under divine oversight before it is exposed to the world. Rather than asking God to rearrange the day, the prayer says, "Guard me within it." This shift changes everything. It produces resilience instead of dependency on ideal conditions. It allows peace to exist even when answers are delayed. When God keeps the soul, he also prepares it for whatever change may come. If the environment shifts, the soul remains steady. If it does not, the soul does not collapse under disappointment. This is why deliverance of the soul is a greater miracle than escape from trouble. One changes location, the other transforms capacity. Psalm 120 quietly teaches that the deepest work of God often happens internally before anything external moves. When the soul is kept, life no longer has the final voice. Circumstances may speak loudly, but they do not speak last, because the soul has already been secured by a higher authority that governs from within on. E of the quiet dangers the psalm exposes is the tendency to carry yesterday's battles into today. Many people wake up physically in a new morning, but internally they are still standing in old arguments, unresolved pain, disappointments, and fear. Time has moved forward, but the soul has not. This is how weight accumulates. Not through one overwhelming event, but through battles that were never released, only postponed. Psalm 120 recognizes this condition without directly naming it. The distress described is not sudden, it is prolonged. It suggests a soul that has been under strain long enough for weariness to set in. Carrying yesterday battles is exhausting because it forces the soul to fight on multiple timelines at once. You are responding to today while still reacting to what happened before. Emotions rise faster than situations deserve because they are amplified by unresolved memory. A small trigger feels heavy because it is standing on the shoulders of past wounds. This is why mornings can feel burdensome even before anything goes wrong. The soul wakes up already braced for impact. Spiritually, this is dangerous because it blurs discernment. When yesterday's pain is still active, the present is interpreted through old lenses. Neutral moments feel threatening. Silence feels like rejection. Delay feels like denial. The psalmist understands that if this cycle continues, the soul itself becomes the battlefield. That is why the prayer is not focused on winning arguments or proving truth, but on deliverance. He is asking God to break the internal carryover of conflict. Morning prayer becomes the interruption point. It is the place where yesterday must be laid down intentionally, not ignored, not denied, but released. Without this release, the soul never truly rests, even in sleep. It simply pauses, and when morning comes, the weight resumes. Psalm 120 offers lang. Huge for that moment. It gives the soul permission to say, I am still affected, without being condemned for it. God's design for the morning is renewal, not continuation. Scripture speaks of mercy being new, not recycled. But mercy can only be received by a soul willing to let go of what it has been gripping. Carrying yesterday's battles into today subtly communicates mistrust, as though God was present then but may not be sufficient now. Morning prayer restores alignment by placing the weight back where it belongs. This does not mean yesterday no longer matters. It means yesterday no longer governs. Lessons may remain, but burdens must leave. When the soul releases old battles, it regains clarity. Energy returns. Responses soften. The psalmist's cry reflects a desire for this kind of freedom, not freedom from memory, but freedom from domination by it. Starting the day without releasing yesterday is like stepping into a journey already tired. The road may be manageable, but the strength is gone. Psalm 120 quietly insists that the soul was never meant to live this way. Distress acknowledged and surrendered loses its grip. When yesterday's battles are placed before God in the morning, they stop bleeding into today, and the soul is finally allowed to move forward unburdened, awake, and present, rather than dragged backward by what it survived but never released. There is a subtle but powerful truth hidden in the way Psalm 120 approaches deliverance. The psalmist is not pleading to be removed immediately from his situation. He is asking to be aligned correctly within it. This distinction matters because deliverance is often misunderstood as escape. Many people define God's help by how quickly discomfort ends. But Scripture consistently shows that divine deliverance is more about positioning than relocation. Alignment changes how a situation is carried even before it is changed. Escape focuses on geography and timing. Alignment focuses on authority and posture. When someone is misaligned internally, even freedom can become confusing. Peace arrives, but anxiety remains. Opportunity opens, but fear still governs decisions. This is why God often refuses to rush deliverance in the way people expect. He understands that removing pressure without correcting alignment simply relocates the problem. The psalmist seems to know this intuitively. His prayer targets the soul, not the surroundings. Divine alignment brings clarity. It recalibrates perspective so that lies lose credibility and truth regains its weight. When alignment is restored, the soul remembers who it answers to. Fear no longer sets direction. Offense no longer dictates reactions. The environment may still be hostile, but it no longer defines identity. This is deliverance at a deeper level. Nothing visible may change immediately, but everything internal begins to shift. Psalm 120 shows that deliverance is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is quiet, almost unnoticed. It shows up as restraint where there used to be impulsiveness, peace where there used to be agitation, discernment where there used to be confusion. These are signs that alignment has occurred. The soul has been repositioned under divine authority, even if the circumstances remain unresolved. Morning prayer plays a critical role in this process. Alignment is rarely accidental. It is chosen repeatedly, often daily. In the morning, the soul is most capable of being repositioned because it has not yet been shaped by the day's pressures. Asking for deliverance at that hour is really asking to be rightly aligned before influence begins. It is choosing heaven's order before the world's demands attempt to impose theirs. When alignment precedes escape, freedom lasts. If escape comes first, alignment must still be learned later, often painfully. Psalm 120 suggests that God prioritizes longevity over speed. He is not merely interested in getting you out. He is committed to setting you right. This kind of deliverance produces stability. Even if the season continues, the soul does not fracture under it. Alignment also protects against regression. When circumstances eventually change, a misaligned soul often recreates old patterns in new environments. But when alignment has taken place, even new challenges are met with wisdom rather than panic. Deliverance, then, is not an event but a state of being rightly ordered. Psalm 120 quietly teaches that when the soul is aligned with God, no environment has the power to dismantle it, because the center of gravity has shifted from external conditions to internal authority, and the soul begins to move through life from that settled place rather than chasing relief as proof of God's presence. Psalm 120 draws attention to a form of warfare that is often underestimated because it leaves no visible wounds. It is the battle of the tongue. Words are not neutral. They carry intent, direction, and consequence. The psalmist speaks of lying lips and deceitful tongues, not as minor irritations, but as forces capable of threatening the soul itself. This reveals that speech has power beyond communication. It shapes perception, alters atmosphere, and either reinforces truth or corrodes it over time. The warfare of the tongue operates subtly. It does not always shout. Sometimes it whispers. A repeated lie, a half-truth, a manipulative statement, or a careless accusation can slowly erode clarity. Over time, the soul begins to internalize what it repeatedly hears. This is why distorted speech is dangerous. It does not merely misinform, it attempts to reframe reality. When lies go unchallenged, they seek to become truth in the listener's mind. Prayer becomes the counter weapon in this kind of warfare, not because prayer is louder, but because it is aligned with truth. When the psalmist cries out, he is not engaging in verbal combat with his accusers. He is repositioning himself under a higher authority. This is wisdom. Engaging every lie directly often multiplies confusion. But prayer redirects the battle to a realm where words are weighed differently and truth is not negotiated. The tongue is also a battlefield internally. The words a person speaks to themselves can either reinforce strength or deepen distress. When surrounded by deceitful speech, the temptation is to adopt the same language internally, replaying accusations, doubting motives, and rehearsing fear. Psalm 120 interrupts this cycle. It replaces internal monologue with prayer. Instead of arguing internally, The psalmist speaks upward. This shift protects the soul from becoming its own adversary. Morning prayer is especially strategic in this warfare. The words you speak early become the standard by which later words are measured. When prayer establishes truth at the start of the day, lies encounter resistance. They may still be heard, but they do not land with the same force. The soul recognizes dissonance because it has already been tuned to truth. The weapon of prayer is not aggression, it is alignment. It does not seek to dominate others, but to preserve integrity. In a world where words are often used to manipulate, prayer becomes a way of returning language to its original purpose. It restores speech as an act of trust rather than control. Psalm 120 teaches that victory in this warfare does not come from having the last word, but from having the right word shape the inner life. When prayer governs speech, reaction slow, discernment sharpens, and restraint replaces impulse. The psalmist's focus on the tongue is not accidental. He understands that whoever controls language influences direction. By choosing prayer over retaliation, he chooses to let truth rather than noise determine the outcome. In this way, the weapon of prayer quietly disarms the power of deceit, not by silencing it externally, but by refusing to let it occupy the soul internally, where real damage is done. One of the most freeing truths embedded in Psalm 120 is the understanding that God responds to sincerity, not volume. The psalmist does not describe a loud, dramatic, or elaborate prayer. There is no indication of performance, no attempt to impress, no spiritual theatrics. What is emphasized instead is distress that is honestly expressed. The power of the prayer lies not in how forcefully it is delivered, but in how truthfully it is offered. This challenges a common misconception that intensity must always be external to be effective. Sincerity strips prayer down to its essence. It removes the pressure to sound strong when you feel weak or confident when you are uncertain. In Psalm 120, the psalmist does not exaggerate his faith or minimize his pain. He simply speaks from where he actually is. This authenticity creates alignment. When the inner state and the spoken prayer match, there is no internal resistance. The soul is no longer divided between what it feels and what it says. That unity carries weight in the spiritual realm. Volume, on the other hand, can sometimes hide insecurity. Loud prayers can be sincere, but they can also become a way of convincing oneself rather than communicating with God. Psalm 120 teaches that God is not persuaded by force, repetition, or emotional display. He is attentive to truth. A quiet, honest cry carries more authority than a rehearsed declaration that does not reflect the heart. This is why the psalmist can say with confidence that he was heard. The hearing was not earned by effort, but granted because of authenticity. This truth is especially important in the morning, early hours of day, and reveal the real condition of the soul before it has time to perform. Fatigue lowers pretense. Silence exposes emotion. In that space, sincerity comes more naturally than strength. Morning prayer does not need to be loud because the soul itself is already speaking. God listens to what is beneath the words as much as to the words themselves. Responding to sincerity also reveals God's character. It shows that access to Him is not limited to the emotionally strong or spiritually articulate. It belongs to the honest. This removes comparison from prayer. You are not competing with anyone else's expression or intensity. Your prayer is measured by truth, not by sound. Psalm 120 reassures the weary soul that even a simple cry, if real, reaches heaven. Sincerity also produces peace because it removes pressure. When you are not trying to impress God, prayer becomes refuge instead of responsibility. You are no longer managing an image, you are presenting a condition. That posture invites response. The psalmist does not say God heard him because he prayed well, but because he cried from distress. This reframes prayer as relationship rather than ritual. In environments filled with noise, exaggeration, and false speech, sincerity becomes an act of resistance. It reclaims truth in its purest form. Psalm 120 honors this kind of prayer. It reminds the soul that God is not drawn to volume, but to honesty, and that the quietest prayer spoken from a truthful place can carry more power than the loudest declaration spoken from performance. Learning to rest while surrounded by unrest is one of the most difficult disciplines of the soul. Psalm 120 does not describe a peaceful environment. It describes tension, hostility, and constant exposure to conflict. Yet within that reality, the psalmist reveals a longing not just for change, but for inner rest. This kind of rest is not produced by favorable conditions. It is cultivated through trust and alignment. It is the ability to remain internally settled even when external circumstances remain unresolved. Unrest around you naturally attempts to invade you. Noise demands attention. Conflict demands response. Pressure demands urgency. Without intentional boundaries, the soul begins to mirror the environment. Anxiety becomes normal. Tension becomes constant. Rest feels irresponsible. But Psalm 120 quietly challenges that pattern. It shows that rest is not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to let conflict dictate the inner state. Rest in such conditions is not passive. It is active resistance against chaos. It requires discernment to know when to engage and when to remain still. The psalmist acknowledges the presence of warlike speech and deceitful voices, yet he chooses to direct his energy upward rather than outward. This decision preserves strength. Constant engagement drains the soul, but selective engagement, guided by prayer, sustains it. Morning prayer becomes the training ground for this kind of rest. Before the day introduces its unrest, the soul is taught where to anchor. Rest does not mean the problems disappear. It means they are placed in proper perspective. When the soul rests in God, it no longer carries the illusion that it must fix everything immediately. Urgency gives way to clarity. Reaction gives way to response. There is also a humility in learning to rest amid unrest. It acknowledges human limitation. It admits that not every battle is yours to fight and not every tension is yours to resolve. Psalm 120 reflects this humility. The psalmist does not attempt to manage the chaos around him through control. He entrusts himself to God's keeping. That trust creates space for rest to exist even while questions remain unanswered. Rest under pressure is often misunderstood as indifference, NCE. In reality, it is a sign of deep faith. It says, I care, but I am not consumed. This posture protects the soul from burnout and bitterness. It allows compassion to survive in harsh environments. Without rest, even good intentions become heavy burdens. Learning to rest while surrounded by unrest also reshapes time. Moments slow down, decisions become more thoughtful, emotions lose their urgency, the soul begins to breathe again. This does not happen automatically. It is practiced often daily through prayer and surrender. Psalm 120 models this practice by turning distress into dialogue rather than despair. In a world that thrives on agitation, choosing rest is countercultural. It is a declaration that peace is not dictated by circumstances, but by alignment. The psalmist's quiet confidence shows that rest is possible even in hostile spaces when the soul has learned where to lean. This kind of rest does not ignore reality. It transcends it, allowing the soul to remain whole and steady while everything around it remains unsettled, without being pulled into the same turbulence or losing its center of gravity. Learning to rest while surrounded by unrest is one of the most difficult disciplines of the soul. Psalm 120 does not describe a peaceful environment. It describes tension, hostility, and constant exposure to conflict. Yet within that reality, the psalmist reveals a longing not just for change, but for inner rest. This kind of rest is not produced by favorable conditions. It is cultivated through trust and alignment. It is the ability to remain internally settled even when external circumstances remain unresolved. Unrest around you naturally attempts to invade you. Noise demands attention. Conflict demands response. Pressure demands urgency. Without intentional boundaries, the soul begins to mirror the environment. Anxiety becomes normal. Tension becomes constant. Rest feels irresponsible. But Psalm 120 quietly challenges that pattern. It's how's that rest is not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to let conflict dictate the inner state. Rest in such conditions is not passive. It is active resistance against chaos. It requires discernment to know when to engage and when to remain still. The psalmist acknowledges the presence of warlike speech and deceitful voices, yet he chooses to direct his energy upward rather than outward. This decision preserves strength. Constant engagement drains the soul, but selective engagement guided by prayer sustains it. Morning prayer becomes the training ground for this kind of rest. Before the day introduces its unrest, the soul is taught where to anchor. Rest does not mean the problems disappear. It means they are placed in proper perspective. When the soul rests in God, it no longer carries the illusion that it must fix everything immediately. Urgency gives way to clarity. Reaction gives way to response. There is also a humility in learning to rest amid unrest. It acknowledges human limitation. It admits that not every battle is yours to fight and not every tension is yours to resolve. Psalm 120 reflects this humility. The psalmist does not attempt to manage the chaos around him through control. He entrusts himself to God's keeping. That trust creates space for rest to exist even while questions remain unanswered. Rest under pressure is often misunderstood as indifference. In reality, it is a sign of deep faith. It says, I care, but I am not consumed. This posture protects the soul from burnout and bitterness. It allows compassion to survive in harsh environments. Without rest, even good intentions become heavy burdens. Learning to rest while surrounded by unrest also reshapes time. Moments slow down. Decisions become more thoughtful. Emotions lose their urgency. The soul begins to breathe again. This does not happen automatically. It is practiced often daily through prayer and surrender. Psalm 120 models this practice by turning distress into dialogue rather than despair. In a world that thrives on agitation, choosing rest is countercultural. It is a declaration that peace is not dictated by circumstances but by alignment. The psalmist's quiet confidence shows that rest is possible even in hostile spaces when the soul has learned where to lean. Peace is often misunderstood as something that arises when circumstances finally cooperate. Many people postpone rest until problems are solved, conflicts are resolved, or environments become safer. Psalm 120 quietly corrects this assumption by revealing that peace is not primarily environmental, it is positional. It is a posture the soul adopts, not a condition the world provides. The psalmist is surrounded by tension, falsehood, and hostility. Yet he speaks from a place that longs for peace without surrendering his stability to the chaos around him. When peace is treated as an environment, it becomes fragile. It depends on people behaving well, situations improving quickly, and uncertainty disappearing. The moment any of those elements shift, peace collapses. This is why many people feel calm only briefly and anxious most of the time. Their peace is outsourced to circumstances they cannot control. Psalm 120 shows a different way. It presents peace as something carried, not something waited for. Peace as a spiritual posture begins internally. It is the decision to trust God's governance even when evidence suggests unrest. This posture does not deny reality, it reorders it. Conflict may exist, but it is no longer central. Lies may be spoken, but they are no longer authoritative. The soul chooses where it stands, regardless of what surrounds it. That choice is what makes peace resilient. The psalmist's statement, I am for peace, deeply revealing. He is not describing his environment. He is describing his orientation. He has chosen peace as his stance, even though others choose war. This shows that peace is not passive resignation, but intentional alignment. It is possible to be for peace without being naive, and to remain calm without being detached. Peace as posture allows engagement without absorption. Morning prayer strengthens this posture because it sets the soul's position before external forces attempt to shift it. When peace is established early, it becomes a reference point throughout the day. Decisions are made from rest rather than urgency. Responses come from clarity rather than irritation. The soul no longer chases calm, it carries it forward. This posture also protects identity. When peace depends on environment, identity fluctuates with circumstances. Confidence rises and falls based on outcomes. But when peace is internal, identity remains steady. The soul knows who it is, even when misunderstood, delayed, or opposed. Psalm 120 reflects this steadiness. The psalmist does not allow the hostility around him to redefine his nature. Peace as a spiritual posture requires surrender. It releases the need to control every outcome. It accepts that some tensions will remain unresolved for a season. This surrender is not weakness, it is trust. It acknowledges that God's presence is sufficient even when answers are incomplete. That trust anchors the soul deeper than favorable conditions ever could. Living this way changes how pressure is experienced. Challenges are still felt, but they are not overwhelming. The soul remains open rather than defensive. Compassion survives where bitterness would normally grow. Psalm 120 invites this kind of peace, not by promising a quiet world, but by forming a steady heart that knows how to remain aligned even when the environment refuses to cooperate. 10. Starting the day with heaven's perspective is the act of choosing which lens will define reality before competing narratives rush in. Every day arrives with multiple interpretations waiting to be accepted. Fear offers one version, pressure offers another. Memory, experience, and expectation all attempt to frame what lies ahead. Without intention, the soul absorbs these perspectives unconsciously. Psalm 120 invites a different approach. It models the discipline of lifting the eyes upward before looking outward, allowing divine truth to shape perception before human anxiety takes the lead. Heaven's perspective does not deny difficulty, it reorders significance. From that vantage point, problems are real but not ultimate. Delays are frustrating but not defining. Opposition is present but not victorious. When the soul begins the day grounded in this view, reactions slow down. The need to panic diminishes because the larger picture has already been acknowledged. This is not optimism. It is alignment with a reality that extends beyond the immediate moment. Human anxiety thrives on limited vision. It interprets situations only by what is seen, felt, or anticipated. This narrow field magnifies uncertainty and minimizes hope. Psalm 120 disrupts this pattern by redirecting attention to God's attentiveness. The psalmist begins with the awareness that he has been heard. That single conviction reframes everything that follows. Being heard means the situation is not isolated. It is observed, known, and held within divine awareness. Morning prayer is where this perspective is intentionally received. Before emails, conversations, and responsibilities begin shaping thought, the soul is reminded of its place within a larger order. This reminder brings proportion. A stressful meeting becomes a moment, not a verdict. A difficult interaction becomes an experience, not an identity. Heaven's perspective protects the soul from absolutizing temporary struggles. This perspective also changes language. Words spoken internally shift from fear-based conclusions to faith-rooted reflections. Instead of assuming the worst, the soul learns to wait. Instead of rushing to defend, it learns to discern. Psalm 120 shows that perspective precedes peace. When the heart knows where it stands, it does not need to react to every disturbance. Starting the day this way builds resilience. The soul becomes less reactive and more responsive. It can engage the world without being swallowed by it. Heaven's perspective does not remove responsibility, it steadies it. Decisions are made with wisdom rather than desperation. Emotions are acknowledged without being allowed to